Okay. Oh, there's sirens outside. But hello, everyone, and fellow hand members, and welcome to our first ever Let's Talk Movement Disorders event. Today is Saturday, April 24th, 2021, and the event is probably going to go from 10 a.m. to a little earlier than 1 p.m., we're estimating. But yeah, thank you for being here today, and let's get started. And if someone can man the waiting room, that'll be great. Okay, so here is our agenda for today. From 10 to 11, there will be a presentation from our education committee. And then 11 to 12 p.m., our outreach rep will be giving a presentation and then demonstrating a video. And then from 12 to 1, we'll have a display of the I Stop Shaking work done by the innovation team. And we'll be doing our first raffling after education and outreach presentation, and then our last one after the innovation team demo.
All right, so today we have members from our seminars and research squad from the education committee, and they're basically going to be providing an overall overview of Parkinson's disease, including a statistical overview about its prevalence in populations, as well as its signs and symptoms, and they'll also be touching upon ongoing research and treatment. And there will also hopefully be a few interactive components, so we could all have good discussions about some of the topics we talk about today.
And for our outreach committee, they're split into two squads. So the event squad works on updating our website with weekly blog posts, and they presented at the UCLA Brain Awareness Week. And currently they're working on launching an interview series for members to learn more about students and professionals within the UCLA community. And our curriculum squad is in charge of developing and formatting our curriculum to present to high school and middle schools across the country. The team also takes responsibility for producing videos that are used for other events and organizations such as Project Encephalon, which is an international neuroscience organization. And the curriculum team within the outreach committee will today be presenting an interactive neuroscience lesson that they recently presented virtually to Bay Area middle school students. And for our innovation team, we've been working on the patented I Stop Shaking tremor therapy prototype, creating 3D CAD designs and computational simulations for gyroscope stabilization and fluid cushioning. And our team will be displaying our patent design of the device along with our progress on the prototype. Okay, and we're just gonna take maybe 4 minutes here for our participants to fill out the pre-event form. You can just scan it with your phone, I suppose. And if anyone needs a link, feel free to let me know and we can send it in chat. But this is just going to be a pre-event survey, and it also will be used for raffling. All right, hopefully at this time, everyone has either the link or has scanned the QR code. So we're going to move into our first event of the day, which is by our wonderful education committees. So here we go.
Hi guys, so today we're going to be doing a presentation about Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's disease is a neurological disorder caused by low dopamine levels, and it specifically affects movement. And it's also a progressive disorder, which means that the symptoms gradually begin to worsen as the disorder progresses. And there's currently no cure for Parkinson's, but there are medications that can help improve symptoms. So we're going to start off by talking about a few statistics on Parkinson's, and then we're going to dive deeper into symptoms, causes and treatments, and ongoing research. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so Parkinson's is a very important disorder to focus on because it impacts such a large number of people. Approximately more than 6 million people suffer from Parkinson's disease globally, although that number can range anywhere from 6 million to the low 8 millions. And this makes Parkinson's the second most common neurodegenerative disorder right after Alzheimer's. And Parkinson's disease also has a large financial impact since Parkinson's medication and Parkinson's related surgery is very expensive. And the average cost of Parkinson's medication is $2,500 per year. and Parkinson's-related surgery can cost up to $100,000 per patient. Also, the combined direct and indirect costs of Parkinson's in the US, including treatment costs, disability costs, and lost income from inability to work, are estimated to $25 billion a year. So all of this further reiterates why Parkinson's is such an important disorder to focus on. Next slide, please. So of the 6 million people globally believed to have Parkinson's, over 1 million of those are those who reside in the United States. And this is more than those affected by multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis combined. Also, this means that nearly 1/6 of the population suffering from Parkinson's comes from the United States. So that can vary, although that can vary based on the level of reporting that various countries provide about their health statistics. Furthermore, every year in the US, around 60,000 Americans are diagnosed with Parkinson's, although many more thousands of cases can go undetected. And the most affected age group is between 60 to 85 years, meaning that most of the people diagnosed with PD are aged 60 to 85. However, there is also another variation of Parkinson's called young onset Parkinson's disease, in which people begin experiencing Parkinson's symptoms at an age as low as 20 and up to 50 years of age. And of the 1 million people with Parkinson's in the US, about 2 to 10% of them have young onset Parkinson's disease. And the incidence of Parkinson's is also a lot more common in men than women, with Parkinson's affecting 50% more men than women. And it's not exactly clear why men are more affected than women, but some theories are that estrogen has a protective effect in women, and men are more prone to minor head trauma, as well as more likely to be exposed to toxins. And finally, about 50 to 80% of people with Parkinson's develop other neurological disorders such as dementia, and also Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease, or progressive supranuclear palsy. And all of these disorders have symptoms very similar to those of Parkinson's, but present either before or after the Parkinson's diagnosis. Next slide, please.
The next part of this presentation is on the common symptoms that Parkinson's patients experience. And before I start discussing them, two important things to remember are that more often than not, when people think of Parkinson's, they tend to usually just focus in on the motor symptoms, like what happens to the body when someone is diagnosed with Parkinson's. But it's really important to consider the non-motor symptoms as well, so like the cognitive and behavioral symptoms, which we'll be discussing in this presentation. And it's also important to note that Parkinson's looks different in different people. So some people might experience all of these symptoms to a high degree, while other people might only experience a few of them. Next slide. So first, we'll start off with the motor symptoms, with the three most common being stiffness, tremor, and slowness of movement. Parkinson's tremors can be classified into two categories. The first one is resting tremor, and this is also the most typical and common one. And this usually happens when the body is still and relaxed. So usually it happens when like the patient is sitting or simply lying in bed. And it's often called a pill rolling tremor because it can kind of look like the person is trying to roll a pill between their thumb and their index finger. And later on in this presentation, I'll actually be showing you a video of what that looks like, and hopefully you can like recognize how difficult it must be to live with these tremors and oftentimes not be able to control them. And the other type is an action tremor, and this usually happens when the person is doing something like trying to hold a book or drink water from a cup. And the next symptom that has a really big impact on the patient's life and what they're able to physically do is stiffness and inflexible muscles. So because of this stiffness, some people with Parkinson's might have problems turning around, getting out of chairs, turning over in bed, pretty much anything, because they're not able to move their muscles as much as like where someone who might not have Parkinson's. And it can also make it difficult to do more simple tasks like writing or doing up buttons. And also, Parkinson's doesn't just affect muscles in like the legs and the arms, it can affect muscles all throughout your body. So that's why someone with Parkinson's might have a fixed mask-like facial expression because they're unable to move the muscles in their face. And also with stiff muscles, obviously it's hard to move your body the way you want it to. So some patients might have like constant bad posture that they're unable to control. And because of that, that can lead to postural hypertension, which is basically high blood pressure. And we all know like high blood pressure is no good. Like that can lead to heart disease. And obviously for someone with Parkinson's, like heart disease is just an extra stress. Next slide, please. Okay. And so this first video is
Resting
the pill
tremor
rolling tremor that I was talking about.
consists of rapid involuntary movements of agonist and antagonist. In the following video, you are about to see a patient with Parkinson's disease with tremor in his both upper extremities. The tremor in Parkinsonism is characteristically present at rest and ameliorated during initiation of purposeful movements.
So if you look in the video, you can probably see how like why it's called a pill rolling tremor. So it kind of looks like they're trying to move a pill between their thumb and their index finger, and that would be a resting tremor because that person is just sitting there and having to go through these tremors. And then the next video talks about the stiffness and inflexible muscles. It's someone who's been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and you can see like you can just by looking at them, you can tell like how much pain that they're in and how difficult it is for them to even get out of bed. And also, if you paid attention to the video, you probably saw how the person like they weren't able to swing like what usually when we walk like our arms swing by our sides, but someone with Parkinson might not be able to do that because of their stiff muscles. So it's like small movements like that we don't even realize like it can have a great impact on Parkinson's patients. Next slide, please.
Resting
Next, we'll be discussing the cognitive symptoms of Parkinson's. So, in addition to slow motor skills, people with Parkinson's can also have trouble taking in information and completing mental tasks. So, for example, they might have trouble like following a TV program, difficulty keeping up with conversations, like they might like constantly be wandering off, and they might take longer to solve problems and make decisions. And they might also struggle with multitasking and selective attention. So an example of this would be like having difficulty completing a crossword puzzle with the TV on. So like someone who's not diagnosed with Parkinson's, like that's not too hard for them. But someone with Parkinson's, like they don't have the ability to like for selective attention. So they wouldn't be able to focus on just the crossword puzzle if there was like background noise. And they might be unable to tie their shoe while someone is trying to talk to them because multitasking can be really difficult. And they might also have trouble with solving new problems that arise, and they might show poor judgment in responding to situations simply because they just don't have control over it, and they can have trouble initiating new ideas. It might take longer for them to learn new information as well as recall old information because their memory is compromised, and their visuospatial skills are compromised as well. So they might struggle with things like understanding a map, or let's say the patient really likes to knit, and so they might have trouble like following a single pattern throughout, and they might have trouble like figuring out how to put furniture together. And language is affected as well, which is a really like important symptom, because obviously like language is something that affects like every aspect of our lives. So many people with Parkinson's, they speak quietly and in one tone, and they don't convey much emotion. And they might like slur their words, they mumble or like trail off at the end of the sentence. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm gonna reshare the slide since I think it's. Let's try this again. Beautiful. Okay.
And we're going to show you like a short part of this video, and it basically shows this man, he used to play, I believe he played the trumpet or some instrument, and now it's really difficult for him to do that because of Parkinson's, and also his speech was affected because of Parkinson's.
I started playing the trumpet when I was approximately 8 years old. I've played jazz, I've played classical, I've done a lot of ethnic, a lot of dances. I started out as a junior high school music teacher in New York City and worked my way up to supervisor. I became director of music for the Philadelphia Public Schools for approximately 6.5 years. Went to Florida and became a professor and chairman of music for Florida International University. And meanwhile, I kept playing, always playing.
When Mike and I met, he was still playing his trumpet, and he was still playing beautifully.
About 9 years ago, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. I had noticed a tremor in my hand and in my jaw, which really didn't bother me that much, but then I was working, performing on trumpet, and all of a sudden everything seemed to collapse. And I went to several doctors until a neurologist confirmed that I had Parkinson's. A few years ago, I began to hear, "What?" They didn't understand what I was saying, or I was speaking too softly.
Before he started therapy, I feel that I was always saying, what?
Dr. Savitz has the most common problem we see in Parkinson's disease related to speech, which is soft speech or hypophonia. He has difficulty projecting his speech loud enough for other people to hear. We've heard that his caregiver also has hearing trouble, and that's a particularly bad combination.
Once we recognize that there is a problem with speech, we commonly refer the patient to a speech-language pathologist.
One of the treatments that we use with patients who have Parkinson's disease and would like to work on their voice is called LSVT, which stands for Lee Silverman Voice Treatment. This is a therapy that was designed for a woman named Lee Silverman who herself had Parkinson's disease.
Often,
So in the video, they talked about hypophonia. So that's what I talked about, like language being affected. So the person might be speaking really quietly. They might slur their words and like at the end, like trail off. And obviously with someone who used to play the trumpet, this can make it really difficult for them to continue doing that. Next slide, please. And finally, the emotional toll of having Parkinson's and also brain changes associated with the disorder can lead to behavioral symptoms, with the most common ones being depression and anxiety. The patient might be suffering from a low mood and an overall reduced enjoyment from life, as well as a loss of motivation and interest in the things that they used to do. And this can lead to feelings of hopelessness, and all this can negatively affect their sleep, appetite, and energy levels, and can even lead to hallucinations. And this is really common among patients with Parkinson's, because obviously they're not able, like the last video we saw, this guy used to play the trumpet, playing the trumpet was his life now, and now he's having trouble doing that after he's been diagnosed because his speech has been affected. So that's why it's really important that if you know someone with Parkinson's, or if you work with patients that have Parkinson's, like if you just volunteer at a hospital or something, then you should take the time to reach out to them and ask them if they'd like to talk to you about how they feel, or simply just find ways to uplift their day, because obviously, like on an everyday basis, they're going through a lot. Next slide. And this video basically talks about what it's like having Parkinson's and anxiety, because a lot of people, what I mentioned at the beginning, like a lot of people, when they think of Parkinson's, they kind of just think, oh, it's just a tremor or someone shaking, but there's a lot more that goes into it.
I'm shocked that there isn't more awareness for Parkinson's and mental health issues. Something needs to be done.
Anxiety has a massive impact. It really did dent my confidence, not my self-esteem. When I was diagnosed, Amy was the very first person I told.
You're kind of naive to it and you just imagine that that person has the shakes. It isn't just the shake, it drastically changed my life.
If you're anxious, it seems to play on your physical symptoms. If you're having a bad day with your physical symptoms, then it plays on your anxiety. They seem to go hand in glove with one another.
With Dad, he is such a jolly character, and that is what he is, but then we see the dark side of Parkinson's. I am the only person that my dad fully opens up to. I feel like I'm there for him a lot, emotionally. I definitely see the ups and downs of the mental health and the Parkinson's. I do wish that more people would understand.
With Parkinson's, I think you should be able to wear your heart on your sleeve and feel that you can express how you're feeling.
Part of me feels sad that my 20s were impacted in that way, but then also proud that I've been there for my family.
They're a massive help and we're a good little unit. It's how we've grown together since the diagnosis.
If there are any tough times I'm going through, he's still my dad, he's still there to listen, he's still supportive and encouraging. No matter what Parkinson's brings, he'll always be my dad.
So hopefully all these videos that we showed you helped you like recognize that Parkinson's looks different in different people. And also like there's a high end and a low end. Like some people might not be suffering through tremors as much, but like they might have really bad anxiety. Other people, the video that we saw of the lady getting out of bed, obviously stiffness was a really big problem. So it's important to like recognize how Parkinson's they might, even though it might not look like they're going through a lot, like definitely they probably are. So it's good to reach out to them and ask them how they're doing. Next slide. So now we'll be moving into like what causes Parkinson's and like the biological basis behind it. So this video just quickly goes over like what causes Parkinson's, so that when we're talking about it, you have a better understanding of it.
Parkinson's is the second most common neurodegenerative disease after Alzheimer's. The most visible features of this disease are a slowness of movement, muscle rigidity, and tremors at rest. There are also many, often debilitating non-motor symptoms, some of which may present before the motor problems. Parkinson's affects many areas of the nervous system and different types of neurons. However, much focus has been placed on neurons in brain regions associated with the overt motor symptoms, notably a region of the midbrain called the substantia nigra pars compacta. This region forms part of a major pathway in the brain that's critical for facilitating movement. In Parkinson's, dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra gradually die, leading to the malfunction of this pathway and the characteristic motor problems. Drugs that replace or mimic dopamine are often used to treat these motor deficits, but they grow less effective over time. Deep brain stimulation may also be used to treat symptoms. However, no current treatment slows the neurodegeneration. A distinctive pathology in most cases of Parkinson's is clumps of misfolded proteins within neurons. Lewy bodies are the most common type. A characteristic component of these is a misfolded protein called alpha-synuclein. These molecules can form small repeated units called oligomers, or longer fibrils. Mounting evidence indicates that these are toxic to neurons and play a key role in driving Parkinson's. Unwanted proteins are normally cleared by the cell's different types of protein-degrading machinery. Some evidence points to these systems being overwhelmed by misfolded alpha-synuclein, and this might be a key factor in what kills the neurons. Parkinson's has also been linked to problems with mitochondria. Mitochondria provide cells with the energy to perform vital functions. They're highly dynamic and can fuse together or break up into smaller versions in response to a cell's energy demands. They can also be transported to areas of a cell that need them the most. However, in Parkinson's, these processes can be impaired, and mitochondria are unable to sustain proper neuronal function. As they become old or damaged, mitochondria are removed and replaced. Again, this recycling is thought to be disrupted in Parkinson's, leading to the accumulation of damaged or worn-out mitochondria. Another idea is that the cells called glia surrounding neurons may play a role in Parkinson's. As dopamine neurons are lost, one particular type of glial cell, called microglia, is thought to take up the resulting cellular debris, triggering an immune response. Once activated, they release inflammatory cytokines, which activate neighboring microglia and another type of glial cell called astrocytes. Chemicals released by activated microglia and astrocytes have been shown to injure neurons. It remains unclear which mechanisms drive the disease process in Parkinson's. What is clear is that with time, more areas of the nervous system develop pathology. And one emerging idea is that this happens through the transmission of misfolded alpha-synuclein. While the multifactorial nature of Parkinson's disease progression might make it hard to fully understand, it does provide a number of potential therapeutic targets for slowing or even halting the neurodegeneration. For example, enhancing the clearance of abnormal proteins and blocking their transmission, improving the function of mitochondria, and targeting the neuroinflammation are all currently active areas of research.
All right. Now, looking deeper into the biology behind Parkinson's that the video discussed, we will be transitioning into the causes behind Parkinson's disease and also its available treatment options for patients. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'll pass it to Colby.
Tiffany, one more, please. Perfect. Okay, so there are three major biological and cellular breakdowns associated with Parkinson's disease that we are going to focus on. So, as mentioned in the video we just watched, one major issue is protein misfolding. So alpha-synuclein is a protein that's primarily found in neurons, and when it forms misfolded oligomers, the protein degrading machinery in the cell becomes overwhelmed, and as a result, a buildup of misfolded protein occurs, which is then transmitted to other cells and leads to neuronal death. Next slide, please.
Another region of the cell that becomes impaired and could lead to an onset of neurodegeneration is mitochondrial breakdown. And what happens is the recycling of old and damaged mitochondria becomes disrupted and impaired, like the video said. And as a result, damaged mitochondria accumulate and initiate a positive feedback cycle in which mitochondrial dysfunction is promoted and cellular functions start to break down. And evidence for this role of mitochondrial dysfunction in neurodegeneration actually continues to increase. Recently, there's been evidence to show that there's a role not only in the loss of mitochondrial function in terms of like ATP provision or calcium buffering capacity, but also the degradation of more organelles through the interaction of mitochondria with other organelles and proteins in this disease. So with its interactions, it could be disrupting additional cellular functions. Next slide, please.
Okay, and lastly, microglia typically release cytokines, which is supposed to modulate neuron function. And inflammatory cytokines in particular are a major component of immune cell functions that are carried out by the microglia. However, when these cytokines start to damage other microglia and astrocytes, it can lead to the release of harmful chemicals and to the injury and death of neurons. And so it's important to notice that each of these cellular breakdown mechanisms are carried out via positive feedback cycles. Next slide, please.
All right, so now transitioning into the treatments, there are three major areas of focus in treatment for Parkinson's, each relating to one of the cellular breakdowns that was discussed on the previous slides. For one, researchers are currently trying to understand protein degradation pathways associated with Parkinson's. As a result, they are focusing on finding the efficacy of clearance proteins in individuals with Parkinson's, as well as creating pharmaceutical treatments to treat alpha-synuclein buildup. Secondly, since mitochondrial dysfunction is also a central factor in disease pathology, researchers are in the process of determining whether or not mitochondrial dysfunction is the cause or effect of Parkinson's. And with this information, they will be better able to find pharmaceutical treatments most appropriate for treatment. And finally, as neuroinflammation caused by overactivity of microglia is a hallmark in postmortem brains of Parkinson's disease patients, it is important that researchers understand the mechanisms by which this occurs and how to treat it while keeping the normal immune cell functions. Next slide, please.
The first treatment option that we will be discussing for alleviating the symptoms of Parkinson's disease are oral drugs. These include medications such as levodopa and carbidopa. So levodopa, also called L-dopa, is the most commonly prescribed medicine for Parkinson's. It's also the best at controlling the symptoms of the condition, particularly with slow movements and stiff or rigid body parts that we saw from the videos. Levodopa also works when your brain cells, or actually the function of the medication is that it works when your brain cells change it into dopamine, which is a chemical the brain uses to send signals that help you move your body. And people with Parkinson's actually don't have enough dopamine in their brains to control this movement, so this is a good substitute. And if you look in the top right image, you can actually see that levodopa is replacing dopamine and is being released into the synaptic cleft and aiding with that function. And then Cinnamate is another prescribed medication, and it's a combination of both levodopa and carbidopa, which is something that makes the levodopa work better, so patients can actually take less of the medication. And it follows the same mechanism through which levodopa enters the brain and is converted to the neurotransmitter dopamine. However, the use of this drug often produces negative side effects like nausea, vomiting, and heart disturbances. So carbidopa is taken alongside levodopa to prevent or minimize these side effects. And Cinnamate actually has the fewest short-term side effects compared with other Parkinson's medications, but it does raise your odds for some long-term problems like involuntary movements. And overall, it's important to note that these medications do not cure or stop the progression of the disease. There's still research being done with that, but they only mask or lessen the symptoms of Parkinson's disease from progressing too quickly. And another con is that these medications often do not reach the deeper portions of the brain where Parkinson's disease develops, which we learned before was a substantia nigra. And so overall, drugs can help make the disorder more bearable, but they're not a definitive solution. Next slide, please.
Next, we have gene therapy. So there are two types of gene therapy, one in which a new gene is introduced to begin the creation of the proper proteins, and one in which a new gene is introduced to replace a faulty gene. This treatment option is usually pretty controversial because of how invasive a surgical procedure it is, and also the fact that it doesn't always produce results. There are also often aggressive immune responses from the body when new genes are introduced, which can lead to quite a few problems. These new genes often can't pass the blood-brain barrier, which is the body's way of preventing infection from new genes and drugs, which the body thinks are foreign substances. And this leads to that immune response we talked about earlier, which can be quite risky for the patient. Next slide, please.
So now addressing the issue of the blood-brain barrier, we have a promising treatment option called intranasal gene therapy. In this treatment, Parkinson's disease drugs are directly delivered to the brain via a simple nasal spray, which can be seen in the top right. And it can generally bypass the blood-brain barrier, which we talked about earlier. So for the patient, this is much less invasive and it's more convenient because they can administer the treatment for themselves at their own home. And also there's fewer recorded side effects, which is good so that no problems are added on to existing symptoms. However, it's important to consider that this therapy is very new and it's still in its clinical trials. But the first published research about this therapy only came out in 2015, which is only 6 years ago, and we still don't know how effective it will be in the long run. But current research finds this treatment to be really promising, and you can see some of the mechanisms at play in these images, so addressing some of the issues that we discussed before that lead to the onset of Parkinson's. Next slide, please.
Okay, and lastly, we have deep brain stimulation, or DBS. So DBS is also referred to as the neurostimulator. It's a surgical treatment for patients with Parkinson's, and it's once again a relatively new procedure, being approved to treat tremors in 1997. In 2002, it was approved to treat advanced PD symptoms, and in just 2016, it was also approved for people with earlier stage PD. DBS involves inserting electrodes into the brain, targeting certain parts of the brain using an MRI scan, and then an impulse generator is placed either into the collarbone or in the abdomen to control the electrical activity of the electrodes. And if you look at the images, you can see the impulse generator by the shoulder there. DBS is best suited for patients who have had PD for at least 4 years and have been unable to control tremors despite medication. It does not improve speech, swallowing, or thinking problems, essentially cognitive symptoms, but it has been shown to be helpful for patients for 5+ years with both tremors and dyskinesia. And just like any surgical procedure, DBS does come with some risks of infection, stroke, and seizures. It is not a first choice treatment, but it can be quite effective if other options do not provide consistent relief. And one last thing that I'd like to emphasize is that deep brain stimulation is not a cure for Parkinson's disease. It is a treatment for physical symptoms, but unfortunately it cannot prevent or slow down disease progression as of yet. Next slide, please.
Right, thank you for the insights into the different treatments that are being used to address symptoms. And so now we will be discussing a few ongoing research projects, both globally as well as here at UCLA, that may bring new discoveries into the field. Next slide, please. So one treatment option that is currently being researched is the use of stem cells to treat Parkinson's, which is called transneuro. In Dr. Baker's research at the University of Cambridge, they are using stem cells to replace the depleted cells in the substantia nigra that are supposed to make dopamine. So on the right, you can see a diagram that basically outlines their method of extracting pluripotent stem cells and then culturing them to develop tissue grafts containing dopaminergic neurons. Using induced pluripotent stem cells from the patient themselves can also reduce rejection of the implants since it is derived from their own cells. This potential treatment option is probably most similar to L-DOPA, as the neurons are able to produce a dopamine precursor to mask the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Something to note is that this is not a complete cure of the disease, especially when we take into account that part of the PD pathology is all the 3 different factors that we discussed earlier, and that these can also spread from cell to cell. Therefore, even new cells that enter the brain may become impaired due to contact with damaged cells. However, by replacing neurodegenerative neurons with functional cells, the group hopes to alleviate and treat the crippling symptoms of the disease by providing a longer lasting alternative to drug therapies. And another thing to note is that the phase 1 clinical trial for this research will come to a conclusion this year with a total of 11 Parkinson's patients undergoing the tissue transplant. Next slide, please. And so here's just a short video that goes into a more detailed overview of their research.
Every single person who ever existed began life as an embryonic stem cell. Stem cells are a particular type of cell which have the capacity to divide, but in the process of dividing, they also produce cells that can turn into other types of cells in the body. Stem cells for Parkinson's disease, I think, have 2 major exciting new developments. One is the use of them for treating the disease, transplanting them in the brain to replace the lost dopamine cells. The other is this new technology, which has been around now for about a decade, where you can reprogram adult cells, cells in the body, back to stem cells and then turn them into any cell that you want. The great excitement I have for stem cells is the potential to change the natural history of treated Parkinson's. The stem cell derived dopamine cells, which I think will come to clinic in the next few years, are designed to replace and repair the lost dopamine cells. They are not a cure. The disease will still carry on. However, my vision on this is that in the future, when people get diagnosed with Parkinson's, they could have a stem cell derived dopamine transplant. You obviously won't need to take any drugs because the dopamine cells will be doing the job that the drugs are currently doing. So you'll avoid all the complications of the drug therapy. They will go back almost entirely to normal with these dopamine cell-based therapies. And obviously the disease may catch up with them after a period of time. But nevertheless, for a large number of patients, that 15, 20 years they get with that cell-based therapy, in effect, will be a cure for them.
So that was just a brief overview. Next slide, please. And so another global ongoing research project is known as the Global Parkinson's Genetics Program, also known as GP². And this project is a 5-year-long endeavor that started just recently, around last year, with a goal of understanding the genotypes of over 150,000 patient volunteers. These patients represent a variety of stages in disease progression, as well as at-risk individuals to better understand the role of genetic factors in the timeline of Parkinson's. And ultimately, they hope to uncover which genetic mutations, regulatory factors, and other contributions lead to various familial forms of PD. Additionally, a core foundation to this project is its emphasis on understanding the global relevance of Parkinson's and promoting diversity, not only in the researchers leading the project, but also in the populations being studied. By doing so, this project aims to focus on underrepresented groups who may have been excluded from the literature historically. Lastly, as this is an international collaboration with researchers from several disciplines, by encouraging a culture of open cooperation, safe data sharing, and democratization of findings, they hope that a joint effort will provide more effective insights into the causes and factors underlying Parkinson's disease. Next slide.
Okay, hold on.
So we also have ongoing research on Parkinson's at UCLA. One of those research projects is headed by Dr. Bitten and Dr. Bronstein. This particular research is part of a global collaboration, which is dedicated to developing a potential treatment for misfolding and aggregating proteins. They're looking at the inhibitory effects of the molecular tweezer CLR01, which can prevent aggregation and misfolding of alpha-synuclein and improve motor deficits. Next slide, please. So this video is currently unavailable right now, but all I really did was go into more detail about the research mentioned in the previous slide. Next slide, please.
So that pretty much wrapped up our material that we wanted to discuss, but since we have a little bit of time left, we can go into a little bit of a case study discussion with whoever's attending. So this is actually a case study that we've gone over before in one of our general meetings. And yeah, let's just get into it. So Dr. Tiffany Chen, shout out, is working at the UCCF Medical Center. Dr. Chen has been treating a man named Erlich Sakari for 3 months. Erlich is 46 years old and has been taking levodopa for 3 years, 7 months, and 13 days. However, he has been experiencing dyskinesia as of late, and as well as tremors, rigidity, and slowness in movement. What should Dr. Chen do? What are some factors she should consider in choosing a treatment for that patient? If anyone has any ideas, you can just shout them out or put them in the chat.
Oh, we have a hand raised by Hugo. Go ahead.
Yeah, because this guy is pretty young. Like he's still 46. I would say consider maybe like a more long-term, like potentially more invasive, but also more like something that'll fix, like truly fix his issue more than just the levodopa, like deep brain stimulation.
Nice, thanks, Hugo. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think the idea of deep brain stimulation is really smart. And I like that you pointed out the age. I think another thing that we can consider is that he's been taking levodopa for a long time, for almost 4 years. So it's likely that this is something we talked about in our general meetings, but there's a possibility that he might have developed like susceptibility to the medication. So I think the idea of using deep brain stimulation as kind of like a neurostimulator would be good in order to as a kind of to kind of address those issues that have now arisen with the medication, and it could also like help pass the blood-brain barrier like we talked about. Yeah.
All right, anyone else would like to share anything? You can also type it into the chat. Otherwise, I think we can wrap up for education. All right, let's go.
All right, yeah, thank you so much for listening in. Yeah, we'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah, thank you so much for education. Give a virtual round of applause to everyone who's here and presented. Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break as outreach gets set up for the next event. So let me. All right, hello everyone, welcome back. We're gonna have Ashley be representing Outreach Committee for today, and I'll be sharing screen. So take it away, Ashley.
Yeah, hi everybody. This is the outreach section for today's event. Unfortunately, many of our outreach members could not make it today, so I'll be the one presenting our slides for today. So if you could move on to the next slide, please. So basically outreach is divided into 2 different committees. So there's events team and then there's curriculum team. So our events team is in charge of managing blog posts, club collaborations, and coordinating with official UCLA events. And one event that we wanted to highlight is their involvement in the UCLA Brain Awareness Week, which is a 3-day event in which HAND was able to present a video about the basics of the brain and neurological disorders to elementary school students. And yeah, we can check it out in the next slide. And yeah, we already pre-recorded our videos, so I guess we can just play that.
Hey everybody, I'm Max.
I'm Anna.
My name's Daniel.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Justin.
Alrighty, so let's get into this very exciting topic about the brain. So, yep, today we're going to be talking about the brain, the thing that makes you be who you are, pretty much. So, the brain is this ugly looking, wrinkly thing inside your head, but it's really like your best friend. It helps you see the world, helps you envision the world, helps you really experience everything around you. And it also tells your body what to do. And if you guys know about the five senses, what are they? They're touch, hearing, taste, smell, and sight. And all these things that help you to experience the world around you, your brain is able to collect information from your senses and then make a decision based off of that. And so without the brain, you honestly wouldn't be you. And that's crazy to think about because everybody is themselves. Everybody is unique to themselves. And every person's brain is special to them. And now we're going to talk about how your brain does this. The brain is like a house. Each room has a different use and different function. And Daniel will be taking over.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about the front of the brain, and that's when all the cool things happen. Now, it can imagine new things. It helps you talk. It helps you think. Let's say I asked you a question. Do you want a chocolate chip cookie or a sugar cookie? Making hard decisions like these ones happens all in the front of your brain. Now moving to the back of the brain. The back of the brain is for seeing. It sees everything you see. It helps you see colors, shapes, motion, and identify things. It helps you name things like if you look outside the window and you see a big green thing, you say, that's a tree. Now we go to the side of the brain. The side of the brain is where you hear and smell things. It lets you listen to music or smell what delicious thing is cooking for dinner. Us talking to you is making you use the side of your brain. Now we go on to the top of the brain. It touches and tastes everything you do. The top of the brain helps you feel a cat's fur or enjoy your favorite snack. Now finally, we're going to do an activity together. Everyone, take a deep, deep breath. Do it with me. Hold it. Breathe out. Now you just work the inside of your brain. It helps you do things like breathing. Now we're going to do another activity. Place your hand on your chest. Do you maybe feel a slight thump? That's your heart, and the brain controls the heart thumping too.
But all brains are different, and some people have even more special brains. People with Parkinson's have a different top of their brain. They have trouble moving their body due to shaking. Their brain isn't able to tell the body what to do very well anymore. The body may not be able to listen to the brain. Everyone, try lifting a pen above your head. Easy, right? Well, imagine if you couldn't lift that pen above your head. This is what many people with Parkinson's experience and have difficulty doing. People with autism are not any different from the rest of us. They do the same things we do, but just at a different speed. Their brains are special. They think differently than someone without autism. Autism can make things that seem easy to us difficult to them, such as talking to your friend. Remember that people with autism are just like us. If you know someone with autism, be patient and considerate, and understand that it is okay if they need more help with certain tasks.
Alzheimer's disease is another problem that can affect the brain. Usually, older people may have it, like your grandparents. The brain might have some problems as they get older, like how an old toy is not like a new one. People may be slower and they forget things really easily. It's important to be kind to them because they sometimes can't remember simple things like where they left their pencil. Now, we're going to meet two new friends. Their names are dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine is a friend who makes you smile. Can you think of a friend who made you smile today? Serotonin is another friend, and together they make you happy. These guys are quite shy and aren't there to make you feel happy all the time. But going outside, seeing pretty flowers, the cool trees, and the open sky makes these friends less shy and makes you and them both happy. You guys should try it out.
Now, why should we study the brain? Why is this important? Well, people who study the brain and the nervous system are called neuroscientists, and we need them to study how our senses make us happy, or sometimes we need them to help fix people's brains. They study our brain and let us know what we do and what we can't. When you are all young right now and your mind is super sharp, you think, you can move around without any problems, but sadly, as you get older, the brain might not work as well as it does now. Problems with your brain could happen, such as Alzheimer's, which is why we need neuroscientists and why they're so important. Because neuroscientists and other scientists can find ways to repair older brains with problems, like your grandparents or your parents, or even you as you get older. There is still a lot we don't know about the brain, and neuroscientists learn more and more and can solve bigger and bigger problems about the brain in the future. And who knows, maybe in the future you will be a neuroscientist and you can help us all out.
Now, sadly, our time together is ending, but I hope you guys learned something new today. Well, bye, and I hope to see you around outside.
Yeah, that was our video for Brain Awareness Week. It was very cute, very wholesome. And yeah, can we move on to the next slide? Yes. Oh. So the second team in outreach is our curriculum team, and curriculum team is involved with outreach to middle school and high school students. They teach basic neuroscience and introduce neurotechnology to students that may be previously unaware about how interdisciplinary the subject may be. In the past quarter, this team worked to develop the curriculum and an interactive presentation to engage students during the lesson. And here we have an example of what a lesson looks like. So if you go to the next slide, we have a video of us teaching the subject. Yes.
Hi everyone, welcome to our presentation today. We're so excited to talk to you guys about the brain, neuroscience, and technology today.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm a second-year biochem major, and I'm from Aliso Viejo, which is also kind of near Irvine. One of the things I really like about neurotech and neurotechnology is that there's always so much constant research happening and so much untapped knowledge that's being uncovered. And I think it's so interesting to learn about such an important aspect of our bodies that kind of acts like the control center for us.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a neuroscience major and I'm from Virginia. I like neurotech and neuroscience because I think it's up and coming and it's really cool to see how surgeons are using technology in the brain today.
Hi everyone, I'm Rohit. I'm a first year MCDB major from the Bay Area, and I'm interested in neurotechnology and neuroscience for similar reasons as Jacob and Anna. And I just think it's incredibly fascinating how scientists are making really big discoveries that help us understand more about the brain.
So we're part of a club at UCLA called High Tech and Neurological Disorders, which also stands for HAND for short. And we aim to increase awareness and education about neurological diseases and technologies, fundraise for adults with those diseases, do our own research on how to create technologies to improve the lives of those living with those diseases. Today, we will be giving you guys a fundamental understanding of the brain, first by understanding neurons and the anatomy of the brain, and then by looking more into neurological disorders such as Parkinson's and epilepsy. So first we have a poll just to kind of gauge your guys' interest and understanding of the brain so far. So the first question we have is, what do you guys think of when you imagine the brain? And so these are some of the responses that we've gotten. And then we also have another question for you guys, and that is, how big do you guys think a brain is? And here are some of your guys' guesses. So a brain is actually around 3 pounds, which is also 15 centimeters long. If you make 2 fists and put them together, that kind of represents the actual size of 2 hemispheres of the brain with their fissures. The wonderful thing is that 2 fists together are actually about the size of an individual's brain. Do keep this in mind that the brain size in humans is not related to intelligence. So we will learn about the 2 hemispheres of the brain later, as well as what intelligence means from the brain.
Now we are going to learn about cells in our body called neurons. Neurons are responsible for sending signals and carrying information throughout our body so that we can carry out all the necessary functions of life. In our brains particularly, there is a giant network of these neurons that help us to process information. As you can see in the picture, neurons have many different parts and do not look like ordinary cells. Two important parts are the dendrite, where the neuron can receive signals and is the starting point, and the axon terminal, which is the ending point where signals can be then sent to other neurons. Now we will be sharing a simulation where you can see how a neuron sends signals to other neurons. Essentially, a message is received by the dendrites, which is the starting point, and passes through the neuron and is transmitted out of the axon terminal, which is the ending point where the signal will be passed on to the next neuron. You can play around with the simulation a little more and add more neurons. There are more than 10 billion of these neurons in our brain, so you can just imagine how big this network is. Next, we'll give a brief overview of the structure of the brain. The brain's outermost layer, the cerebral cortex, is divided into two hemispheres, left side and right side. Each hemisphere of your brain contains 4 lobes. Also, one thing to notice that the picture we're seeing right now is the left hemisphere. So the left side is the front of the brain, where the right side is the back of the brain. On this slide, we'll take a closer look at the 4 lobes of the brain. The frontal lobe is located directly behind the forehead and is the largest lobe in the brain. It involves tasks such as decision-making, problem-solving, and planning. The temporal lobe is located behind the ears and is the second largest lobe in the brain. It involves functions relating to memory, emotion, hearing, and language. The parietal lobe is located near the back and top of the head. It is concerned with the reception and processing of sensory information from the body. For example, physical contact with our skin. The occipital lobe is located at the back of the head and is related to our vision, allowing us to see color, form, and motion.
So next, we're going to be doing an activity that will kind of be modeling the brain by using this online clay modeling tool.
Format, it was extremely difficult to think of activities that the students could do that would be more hands-on and interactive over a virtual platform. However, our members were able to put technology to good use and found this program that allows students to manipulate a virtual ball of clay to help them better understand the different lobes of the brain. And I will be walking you through this program. You guys can also follow along by clicking on the link in the chat. So here we have a ball of clay that will represent our brain, and as we all know, the brain is made up of ridges known as gyri and sulci, and we can essentially model this on this ball of clay by first unchecking the symmetry box on the bottom right corner and drawing little squiggles all over our brain. And then we have to determine which side is the front of our brain and which side is the back of our brain. So for my ball of clay, the left side will be the front of the brain and the right side will be the back of the brain. We can now use the paint tool to color the different lobes of the brain. So here we have the frontal lobe, which is involved in decision making and planning. Next up, we have the parietal lobe, which is involved in the processing of sensory information. Up next, we have the temporal lobe, which is involved in memory and hearing. And finally, we have the occipital lobe, which is involved in vision. So this is just for demonstration purposes, but we would ask the kids to share their screens and show off their virtual creations. And using this program was just one way that we were able to increase interaction with the students and allow them to have a deeper and more hands-on understanding of the brain.
Hi everyone, now we're going to be going over a few questions about what we just covered. So the first question is, if you see a dog and you decide to go pet it, in which order of the lobes does the signal travel in our brains? A, temporal lobe to parietal lobe, B, occipital lobe to frontal lobe, C, parietal lobe to occipital lobe, or D, frontal lobe to occipital lobe. And from this, we can see that the correct answer, which most of you predicted, is occipital lobe to frontal lobe.
So the next question is, what part of the neuron is responsible for receiving signals from neighboring neurons? A, dendrites, B, axon terminal, C, nodes of Ranvier, and D, nucleus. And the correct answer is dendrites, a tree-like extensions at the beginning of a neuron.
So for our next question, which lobes of the brain are most likely to help you watch television? A, temporal lobe, B, occipital lobe, C, parietal lobe, or D, frontal lobe? And so from our responses, we can see that occipital lobe is the correct answer.
Now that we have a more basic understanding of the brain, we can talk a little bit about Parkinson's disease, which is a movement disorder. And Parkinson's disease is the second most common neurodegenerative disorder, and it has over 6 million suffering from it globally right now. But first, we're going to talk about some of the causes and symptoms of Parkinson's. So one possibility that can explain Parkinson's is genetics. Another factor that could lead to Parkinson's is environmental triggers, which could involve exposure to toxins or harmful substances. However, the biggest risk factor for Parkinson's is old age, since it mostly affects people between the ages of 60 and 85. And for the symptoms, symptoms include tremors, stiff muscles, and difficulty performing unconscious movements such as blinking, smiling, or swinging your arms when you walk. And the basic principle behind Parkinson's is a lack of dopamine, and dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a vital role in sending messages to the part of the brain that controls movement and coordination. Without dopamine, it becomes very difficult to perform simple movements. Thus, you can see the symptoms that are associated with Parkinson's. And now we're going to watch a short video about Parkinson's disease, and specifically, we're going to be hearing from a Parkinson's patient.
Parkinson's disease is a clinical diagnosis, so there's really no absolute test that absolutely defines it. It's not like diabetes where we have a blood test, or like a stroke where we can just take a picture of the brain. It's really a clinical diagnosis, which means that we listen to the signs and symptoms that are described by the patient. We also do a physical exam. The classic symptoms that we teach our medical students about, they actually spell the word TRAP, T-R-A-P. T stands for tremor, so the tremor is usually a one-sided tremor in one hand or one leg, and it's usually at rest. R stands for rigidity, which means that patients have increased tone that we can measure on the exam. A stands for akinesia, or lack of movement, and patients will complain of slowness, that they've slowed down. And then P stands for postural instability, and that can be a later finding usually in classic Parkinson's disease, where patients will have falls, they'll have balance issues, and they'll start to sort of lose their balance while they're walking.
Well, first it happens once in a while. With the hand motion and the shaking, that became a standard. But the writing, the organization, and the little confusion and getting fuzzy about things, it was intermittent. I figured everybody has that.
We're really trying to start off on the right foot, so it's really important to emphasize things like sleep. So getting a good night's sleep every night, we try to emphasize about 8 hours at the very least if possible, not napping in the day. Additionally, we think that exercise is very key. We're not talking about an overnight change from being sedentary to running a marathon, but setting goals and trying to keep within those goals is very important. And then eating well, keeping otherwise healthy. We really emphasize the fact that patients live near normal lifespans with this disease, so we want to keep all the other body systems working, keep our stroke risk down, cardiac risk factors down, so eating right and being healthy. It's absolutely
Yeah, so I hoped that clip was helpful. And as we just learned, there's no cure for Parkinson's disease. However, there are many ways in which we can help minimize the symptoms. There's currently a medication called levodopa that can help neurons send signals to each other more effectively. Also, surgical procedures that implant electrodes into patients' brains can help send signaling between the neurons and potentially reduce symptoms. Another treatment for patients with Parkinson's is physical therapy, and this can help them maintain their range of motion and strengthen their muscles. Yeah, so Parkinson's is an extremely important disease, and our organization of HAND is currently working on treating patients with Parkinson's. They're creating a prototype of the I Stop Shaking device, and this device was actually pioneered by our president, Tiffany, and here we have a video that explains what the device is and how it works.
I Stop Shaking Devices presents invention from Silicon Valley to stop Parkinson's disease patients from shaking and tremors. Parkinson's disease is a medical disorder whose primary symptom is excessive muscle contraction and uncontrollable shaking and tremor. Gyroscope science has set a new milestone in the creation of futuristic technology. Successful applications of gyroscopes include inertial navigation systems in the Hubble telescope, mobile phones, aircrafts, space rockets, and submarines. Based on this physics, Silicon Valley innovators Tiffany Chen in California created patent-pending wearable I Stop Shaking devices, which have potential impact in the field of medical science to provide relief for people with shaking hand, head, and foot. There are 3 I Stop Shaking devices. 1, a hand glove. 2, a neck bracelet for head. 3, an ankle bracelet for foot. I Stop Shaking device is powered by 30 gyroscopes spinning at 40,000 RPM per gyroscope and are controlled by an intensity switch and driven by battery. I Stop Shaking gyroscopes provide the patient more precise control over the tremors on their hand, head, or foot. The functions can be accessed through an easy display on the glove, neck, or leg bracelet. I Stop Shaking devices have Intel wireless chip and connects with iPhone. I Stop Shaking device sends data to iPhone as to time, frequency of trembling, degree of trembling, and will plot a chart on smartphones. Devices also measure vital signs and transmit data and sync with smartphones. I Stop Shaking patented devices focuses towards optimum care and healthy life. It's the new marvel in medical technology. I Stop Shaking, balancing lives.
Yeah, so currently we have a team of students who are working to make this vision a reality. So keep an eye out for that.
Who here has heard of someone or knows someone with epilepsy? Epilepsy is the most common chronic brain disease which affects more than 50 million people of all ages worldwide. As we heard a few slides ago, neurons play a huge role in brain function. Typically, neurons fire electrical signals that cause other neurons to fire. When one neuron fires at an odd time or strength, regular brain activity drastically changes so that the brain is unable to do what it usually does. This is what happens when someone has epilepsy. The regular rhythm of neurons is disturbed because of one or more faulty neurons. One way of imagining this is a complex system of roads and streets. If one red light is broken, the flow of cars or signals is broken, and all the cars cannot drive at the regular pace and speed. And this is kind of what happens during epilepsy. When neurons fire irregularly, seizures can occur. And you might wonder what seizures are. Seizures are the effects of an abnormal brain that can lead to many physical symptoms. Some of these symptoms include shaking, jerking, motions, fainting, dizziness, and foaming at the mouth. There are two types of seizures, one called a focal seizure that starts in one spot of the brain, and generalized seizures, which start from the entire brain at once.
Now let's take a look about the research that is being done on epilepsy, both at UCLA and around the world. The UCLA Seizure Disorder Center is a program that researches ways to investigate epilepsy, identify who will develop epilepsy, and study treatments for epilepsy-related disabilities in order to minimize the side effects from those suffering with the disease. One of the main worries that people with epilepsy face is the unpredictability of when a seizure will strike. Researchers have been working to develop neurotechnology that can predict when a seizure will occur. They hope that one day, by using a combination of seizure prediction and brain stimulation, seizures can be stopped before they can even happen. Research is a major part of medicine that sets out to improve the lives of patients suffering from these disorders, and hopefully one day we can find a cure for epilepsy as well as other neurological disorders. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to our presentation.
Yeah, so that was our presentation from the curriculum committee, and we do present at different high schools and middle schools, and we will be continue doing that for this quarter. Could you move on to the next slide? Yeah, so now I'll be talking about the future plans we have in store. So events team will be responsible for hosting some presentations for GMs in the future, including documentary screenings and socials, which you also have in plan for this quarter. So events is also currently working on an interview series in which they interview professionals in the UCLA community, and they will write blog posts about these interviews on our website, so definitely check that out in the future. And we also plan to reach out to other organizations. We're currently working with other high schools so we can host workshops and teach topics related to neuroscience and neurotech to various students. And we're also working with other organizations across the world, one being Project Encephalon, and we plan on creating a podcast episode with them. And we also have a patient support group project going on where our members will get exposure to interacting with patients who have Parkinson's disease. So there's a lot of great projects going on with outreach currently. And that's it from Outreach for today, and thank you for listening.
All right, let's also give a virtual round of applause for Ashley and all of our outreach members that helped in making these awesome videos. Really like the clay demonstration for sure. Okay, well, let me stop sharing. Okay, I think we're gonna do raffling now. How exciting. Okay, I will pause the recording as we do a raffling. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our last segment of our Let's Talk Movement Disorders event. Very exciting. Now we've heard from education and outreach. So we're gonna finish up with our innovation team presentation. Okay, here we go. Okay, so what has been our purpose these past 2 quarters? Well, the device's purpose is to first increase the overall quality of living for patients with essential tremors, or ET, and or Parkinson's disease, PD, and to grant patients freedom of everyday tasks through the use of patient and AI-controlled gyroscopes and accelerometers. And lastly, our third purpose of making the device is for it to track patient lifestyle data along with tremor activity in order for physicians to develop specific treatment plans.
So as Tiffany mentioned, the two kind of target populations of patients that we're looking at are those who have essential tremors or Parkinson's disease. So essential tremors affects about 7 million people in the US. So that's about 2.2% of the US population. And then when we go globally, about 4.6% of adults have essential tremors. And so this is the most common movement disorder that's found in expert clinics. And so usually tremors affect the hands, but they can also be found in the head, arms, tongue, legs, and the trunk of your body. And so these tremors are usually most noticeable when you're holding the hands out or you're making fine hand movements. So you can think of like if you're basically doing any type of task that involves using your hands, so like writing, holding a cup, using utensils to eat. And so this really affects someone's ability to perform certain tasks or activities of daily living. And so that's part of the reason why we are developing the iStopShaking device, just so that patients who have essential tremors are really able to just go about their daily life without having to struggle a lot with these tasks that others of us take for granted because we don't have essential tremor. And so education talked a little bit about Parkinson's disease, and so that's our other target population. And so not as many people have Parkinson's in the US compared to essential tremors, but there are still around 1 million people in the US who have PD, and then more than 10 million people worldwide have PD. And so it's a neurodegenerative disease that's characterized by a loss of dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra. And so usually symptoms will develop on one body side slowly over the years, but then since this is a progressive disease, it can spread to other parts of the body, and this really just depends on the person, so it's different from person to person. And so people with Parkinson's will experience tremor usually at rest. So whereas essential tremor, you're having these tremors when you're trying to do certain tasks, people with PD will just experience these tremors while they're kind of just sitting maybe or standing up. And then they'll also experience bradykinesia, so slowness in moving limbs, limb rigidity, and then some balance and walking problems.
All right, and this is our video. Outreach already played the video, so we'll just bypass this for now. Okay, and as you guys saw in the iStopShaking video, the iStopShaking patent was recently granted in June of 2020. Wow, almost a year now. But I'll walk you guys through the timeline of applying and then receiving the patent. So I would say the project idea and basic research began in 2016, and basically it composed of outlining exactly what the device would look like, as well as what's the purpose of the device and the populations that it could potentially benefit. So a lot of that took like refining, a lot of reading up on materials, as well as looking at like what's currently on the market, which would be technically our competitors. And then in February 2017, that's when we actually filed for the patent and sent in like our initial draft proposal. As you can see, it took over 3 years of back and forth with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, just because it is a legal process. So we had to communicate with lawyers and the office, and also make a lot of modifications to our original draft to ensure it doesn't infringe on other solutions that are currently out there, and that it's unique, and that is actually would benefit someone if it's granted as a patent. Okay, and so here we are in wow, I guess we're in 2021 now. But since 2020, we've been working on the prototype development here at hand at UCLA. And yeah, super exciting journey. And we'll take you guys through what we've done so far.
So basically, the I Stop Shaking device consists of 3 different versions that are wearable devices designed to minimize and reduce the shaking of the hand, head, or foot. So these tremors, as described earlier, by neurological disorders such as essential tremors and Parkinson's disease. So on the right, you can see that there's a glove, neck bracelet, leg bracelet. It's very permutable, the sort of design and where it can be applied on the body.
So going deeper into the design, so first we have calibrated gyroscopes and accelerometers, which sense and counterbalance the tremors. We also have a user interface and dial, which the user can use to adjust settings of the gyroscope. And then we also have built-in sensors which monitor the patient activity, and that data is then sent wirelessly through Bluetooth.
The first sort of component to understand when it comes to the I Stop Shaking device concerns the gyroscopes and accelerometers. So gyroscopes use the Earth's gravity to help determine orientation, and the design consists of a freely rotating disc called a rotor mounted on a spinning axis in the center of a larger, more stable wheel. And so in the animation you see below, that sort of precession is the motion that we want to take advantage of when we want to stabilize tremor. Accelerometers measure acceleration, how fast any sort of motion is occurring. Accelerometers are both used to sense static, such as gravity, that sort of acceleration, and then dynamic acceleration, like that of a tremor or sudden stop, which consists of sudden starts and stops in acceleration. So continuing on about these gyroscopes and accelerometers, each I-stop shaking device contains anywhere from 24 to 30 mini gyroscopes and accelerometers connected to multiple tracks constructed inside hollow tubes. These 5 hollow tubes with up to 30 gyroscopes are connected to brushless controllers and a brushless, slotless DC compact motor, which have high acceleration, low noise, and are connected to a rechargeable power or battery power source so that it can be transported.
So the system further also includes a dial controller, which controls the angular momentum and the spin axis of the gyroscopes. And this is in order to ablate shaking moments relative to purposeful movements of the user. And the user also has access to a digital interface, which they can use to configure settings like pairing, calibration, and tracking.
And so the glove will be connected to an app that someone can access on their phone. And so through this app, the device will measure tremor activity, exercise, heart rate, skin temperature, and exposure to radiation. And so this can be really helpful for both the physician and the patient to look through kind of their health data together to see if there are any changes that need to be made manually to the glove to account for the tremor activity trends in the patients. And then users will also be able to input like their sleep, diet, and mood. So it's kind of like an Apple Watch, but with the added benefit of tracking your tremor activities.
So now you may be wondering what the competitive advantage of such a device is in comparison to other devices on the market. Well, current essential tremor treatments, ET treatments, involve on the surgery side, deep brain stimulation, ultrasound, and thalamotomy. And for medication, there are items such as beta blockers, tranquilizers, and anti-seizure medications. For Parkinson's disease, PD treatments, there are medications such as carbidopa, levodopa, dopamine agonists, and more. And for surgery, there's deep brain stimulation. And so all of these different methods are intravenous or they have to involve some direct contact with the body, which incurs more risk than something as a therapy, such as the glove device that we're developing.
All right, so what is our competitive advantage? It's two prongs here. First, we offer a non-invasive approach. Our wearable devices allow for flexibility and customization while still allowing patients to better perform everyday tasks and just improve their quality of life in general. And second is we offer a sustainable and accessible solution. We plan to have each device being rechargeable and made of recyclable materials, which can reduce medical waste and require only a one-time purchase for an immediate use.
So this is the distribution of our funds. You can see that 25% went towards software research and development, and another 25% went also towards the hardware and the gyroscopes and accelerometers. We had 20% for the clinical trials, and then 10% for each of the prototype materials and testing, project management, and then also administration.
So what's going on in this spring quarter, the current quarter that we are in? As for the engineering side, what we're working on is determining the circuitry and the number of gyroscope accelerometer pairs needed. So we established a range earlier. We need to determine an exact design to go for. We are researching energy efficient setups for fluid-based glove designs. So the motions that we described earlier about gyroscopes are paired with other sort of compressible fluid types or for cooling type gloves. And this sort of pairing is what enables for more vigorous tremor motion to be repressed. Along with that, we're analyzing proper cooling strategies to test for the cooling gloves described earlier, and we are calculating gyroscopic precession coordination. So what I talked about earlier, the animation about the gyroscope spinning, we're calculating how we can use that, and how we can adjust that based on the tremor wave function analysis done on an individual person's tremor, adjusting the precession accordingly.
And then for the design team, we're currently using Fusion 360 to create a 3D glove model for 4 different prototypes of the glove. And so while doing this, we're going to be determining kind of how the gyroscopes and accelerometers will be placed along the tracks on the glove, as well as any battery storage components, and then the other components based on which prototype we're doing. We'll also be using printed circuit boards in Fusion 360 to connect to the gyroscopes and accelerometers, and then we'll be running simulations on the 4 different types of gloves to test their durability.
All right, and again, we are HAN at UCLA. We're a student organization aiming to increase awareness and education of neurological diseases, including movement disorders such as Parkinson's. And the innovation aspect includes our undergraduate prototype team to aid in the building of I Stop Shaking prototypes. And currently we're composed of 4 medical advisors and 2 engineering advisors, and 25 undergraduates, including engineering, science, and design majors. And since you're all here, feel free to check out our website, which also has our Instagram links on there. Oh, I just actually clicked on the website. All right. But that's going to be it for, that's going to be it for innovation team. And let me reshare the screen since I got logged out. Okay. But yeah, that's going to be it for our innovation team. And just to summarize, we just went over our patented IoT device, which will be using gyroscopes and accelerometers to aid patients with ET and PD. And yeah, now we're just going to go to the post-event form. So if everyone could take, let's say 2 or 3 minutes, just reflect on the event today, and then we would go ahead with the concluding presentation or raffling. All right, thank you everyone for joining us at our very first Let's Talk Movement Disorders event. Though it was virtual, it was really nice to see everyone and to have our education, outreach, and innovation team present. It was a pleasure being able to moderate today, and yeah, really happy for everyone to join us. So thank you.